Hello again, everyone. It is 12:05. Thank you very much for joining us. We have a great turnout, it seems like. My name is Hussam Aldib. I'm the International Student Career Advisor here at Mohawk College. And today we have the pleasure of getting Elizabeth Long and Zia Sumar from Long McGalgee Canadian Immigration Law Firm. They're going to be talking about a few different topics like when you can actually work legally when you're studying, how to apply for your postgraduate work permit, and different avenues for obtaining your PR. So without further ado, I'm going to send it to Elizabeth and Zia, and we'll go from there. Thank you again.
Thanks so much, Hussam. It's always a pleasure to be here with you guys. So just to let you guys know what we're doing with regard to the format, Zia and I are going to go through the slides with you first. And then at the end, we're going to have a little Q&A session. So if you have any questions, please enter them in on the Q&A button on the bottom. And yeah, we'll try to get through as many questions as we can in the end. Okay. All right, let's get started. All right. So what we're going to do today is, I know you guys are anxious to know how you can get permanent residence, but before we get there, we want to tell you a few things that you need to know in order to make sure that you're doing everything legally while you have your temporary residence. Okay. So
to start, when you're here in Canada, of course, you have your study permits that allows you to study. Really important to ensure that while you're here, you're always maintaining that status. So you're always keeping your temporary resident status. Now, if you have a study permit that's expiring, or if you're on a work permit that's expiring, really important to submit your extension applications prior to the expiry date that's listed on that permit. As long as you submit a complete application prior to the expiry date that's listed on your study permit, you'll have what's called implied or maintained status while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So if you have a study permit that's expiring, let's say April 1st, you want to make sure that you're submitting your extension application before April 1st so that you're able to continue studying here in Canada while you're waiting for a decision on that extension application. So implied or maintained status continues until you get a decision. Now, with the maintained status, one thing is that it does allow you to continue studying while you're here and while you're waiting for that decision. Now, if you forget, let's say you wake up on April 2nd and you realize, oh no, my study permit expired on April 1st. Well, we do have a period called restoration. So there is the ability for someone who's lost their status to apply to get their status back. Now, the timeline, the window that you have to submit your restoration application is 90 days. So from the date that you lost your status, which was April 1st, you would have a period of 90 days to submit your restoration application. Now, the biggest difference, though, is that when you're submitting a restoration application, you no longer have status in Canada while you're waiting for that decision. And so you do have to stop studying. It's not like the maintained status where you're allowed to continue studying. When you're applying for restoration, you do have to stop studying until you get a decision on that restoration application. So until you get your new study permit. One thing I do want to note, IRCC's website says that for extension applications, you have to submit your extension application 30 days prior to the expiry of your permit. That's incorrect. It's great if you do, but the law is simply that it has to be, that extension application has to be submitted prior to the expiry. So whether it's the day before or a month before, either is fine as long as it's submitted prior.
all right. So, you can work in any job that you want to when you're a student, and also on your postgrad work permit, it's an open work permit. But that being said, it's very important for you to understand that if you wanted to stay in Canada and get permanent residence, that the kind of work that you do does matter. So one of the distinctions that you need to understand about the immigration system is that it's based on what's called the NOC codes, the National Occupation Classification Codes, okay, NOC. And what the government has done is they have classified, they put all the occupations in that they can think of. And so, you know, because they thought of it, therefore they expect us to classify every occupation in and find every work that you do into one of these codes. What they've done is they've grouped all the occupations into different kinds of groups. And they have sort of said that if your occupation is grouped as a tier 0, 1, 2, or 3, that occupation is considered high skilled. And if it's classified as a tier 4 or 5, then that's considered low skilled. Okay. Now, why does that matter? It's because when we look at permanent residence, you will see that the options for high skilled work is so much more for those who have high skilled work than for those who have low skilled work for permanent residence. So it's very important that you understand a plan for permanent residence. And if that plan involves you working in a high skilled job, you understand whether or not your work experience is considered high skilled or low skilled. So what happened is in November of last year, the government completely reconfigured the NOC system for immigration. So prior to that, it was based on the old occupation codes. I think that they were developed in 2016, where it was O, A, B, C, D. Last year, they adopted the 2021 NOC codes for immigration, and it's based on 6 tiers. So now a lot of the occupations that were previously considered low skilled is now high skilled. For example, things like truck drivers or nurses' aides who work at the institutions, you know, different things like tattoo artists, etc. Now they're considered high skilled. There are some, though, that were previously classified as high skilled that are now considered low skilled. And I've just listed a few here. You can check it out. There's a complete list on, you know, how everything correlates in this website. So what's very important to think is this. Don't always rely on what happened to your friends before, okay? I would say you shouldn't rely on what happened to your friends before. The laws change all of the time. And let's say your friend before, you know, was a court clerk and they had gotten permanent residence just fine through express entry. Don't just expect that that will work for you. Okay, you should have your own plan and understand, and the laws change, and that can affect your ability to qualify as well.
Okay, let's talk about, so Liz has gone through working and looking at NOC codes. Let's talk about being able to, what you need to know while you're here studying on that permit and when you can work. So the study permit that you're issued, it has conditions that are obvious, right? Like, for example, the expiry date that we just talked about. There's also conditions on that study permit that are implied so that you're expected to be meeting, regardless of the fact that it may not actually be written on your study permit itself. And one of those is that you must be actively pursuing your studies. So what IRCC means by this is that while you're here in Canada on your study permit, the expectation is that you're always working towards completing your program, so making progress in your program of study. If for whatever reason you decide to stop studying, whether that's you finish your program earlier or you decide that you no longer want to continue in your program, your study permit can become invalid 90 days from when you stop studying. So for example, if you have a study permit that's valid until 2025, but you finish your program in, let's say, April 1st, 2023, you don't have status in Canada until 2025 because of that study permit. You, from that April 1st date when you stopped studying, you will have a period of 90 days where you have status in Canada And after that 90 days, your study permit becomes invalid because now you're no longer actively pursuing studies. So really important to keep that in mind. Now, there are two exceptions to this. The first is if you're on a regularly scheduled break. Now, what we mean by that is if your school has a break that's associated with your program. So IRCC does not put out a schedule for all schools and all programs. They defer back to the school to say what is considered a scheduled break. So what we look at, what you want to refer back to is the academic calendar for your particular program at your school. Okay, that will determine whether or not there is a scheduled break that's part of your program. If there is, then great. That's what IRCC will say is a scheduled break, and that's when you can be potentially not studying. So for example, if you're doing a 4-year degree program and you have the regular schedule for your program is 2 semesters of school and 1 semester in the summer that's off, that summer semester will not be problematic towards the status of your study permit. Okay. The second exception is if you're on an authorized leave. So IRCC basically has this provision here for someone who needs to take time off from school. This is where you've gone to the school, you've let them know that there's a particular reason, for example, medical reason, family reason, that you need to stop studying. But very important, that authorized leave does need to be approved by the school, and you should have it in writing because you will need it later on when you're applying for either extensions or another work for your postgrad work permit. You will have to be able to prove that you were on an authorized leave that was approved by the school. Now, your study permit also allows you to work. That ability to work, though, is tied to your status. So you do have to be a full-time student in order to be able to use your study permit to work. The general rule for working is that you're allowed to work up to 20 hours a week off campus during the school year and full-time during any scheduled break. Now, with that being said, last year, IRCC implemented a temporary policy which allows for international students to work more than 20 hours a week off campus. Now, that policy is in place from November 15th of last year, of 2022, until the end of this year, so until December 31st of this year. And again, it allows you to work more than 20 hours a week, as long as, again, you are still a full-time student. Now, the condition, though, for the eligibility for this temporary policy is that either you held a study permit on October 7th when the policy was announced, or you had already applied for your study permit by that date. And that has to be the same study permit that you're using today. So if that study permit that you held on October 7th has now expired, you've gotten an extension, then unfortunately you don't qualify for this temporary policy. So it is it is referring specifically to individuals who on October 7th, when that policy was announced, held a study permit or had been already applied for that study permit and are still on that same study permit today. It's those specific individuals that can work more than 20 hours a week. The ability to work, like I said, is tied to being a full-time student. So as soon as you are done your studies, you're no longer a student, you do have to stop working. So what I mean by completing your studies is that as soon as you receive any written confirmation from the school that you have completed your program of study, that you've met the requirements, then you're no longer considered a student and you do have to stop working. So this can be the school sending you an email saying, congratulations, you've met the requirements. It can be your final grades being released. It can be your final transcript. Anything in writing that indicates to you that you have completed your program of study. That also means that you are now no longer a full-time student and you do have to stop working. You can't use that study permit to continue working anymore. Now, if you're planning on doing a second program, so you've finished your first program, but you're going to be starting a second program shortly, You can work in between those two programs, as long as that gap of the time between the end date of your first program and the start date of your second program is less than 150 days, and you've already been accepted into that second program.
Awesome. So Zia, let's just sort of run through a little timeline with people. So let's say I'm finishing my final exams. I'm still writing my exams. And so then can I work at that time?
Yep, because you're still doing your exams, you're still a full-time student. You can continue working.
Okay. Then let's say I finish my exams. I don't have my grades, no notification yet. Can I work?
Yep, you're still considered a student, so you can still work.
Let's say I get my grades, it confirms that I passed everything, and I have a notification saying that I passed everything. Can I work then?
No. So now that you've received notification that you've completed your program, you're no longer considered a student, so you do have to stop working.
And then, and we're going to cover this in the next slide, once I apply for the postgrad work permit, can I work then?
Yes, that's when you can start working again.
Okay, even though I don't have my work permit, I can still work?
That's correct. So IRCC has a provision for students who have applied for their postgrad work permit. You can start working as long as you actually hold a study permit on the date of your application. But now I'm getting into
yes. All right, so let's get into it. Let's talk about the postgrad work permit. The postgrad work permit is a golden ticket for you guys. Okay, why is it a golden ticket? It's because it's something that gives you a tremendous opportunity to work anywhere you like. That is pretty rare in immigration law. There's only a few open work permits like the postgrad work permit, and it's a very valuable thing. And, you know, just like the golden ticket in a Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, for example, you only get one in your lifetime normally. Now, there has been some policies in the last couple of years or so where the government has allowed people to extend their postgrad work permit. It's because of, you know, some things that are happening with the immigration system. There were some issues that the government has been experiencing. So they have been allowing students to extend 18 months at a time, you know, in the past few years, since 2021. But you know, we don't know when this problem is going to be fixed. The normal rule is you cannot get another postgrad work permit. You can only apply for one postgrad work permit. Okay. So when you decide whether or not you want to apply for a postgrad work permit, it's very important to have a plan. For example, the length of your postgrad work permit, it usually coincides with your program. So if your program is from, you know, 8 months to 2 years, so it's under 2 years. And when I say 2 years, it's 2 academic years, okay? Each academic year is often 8 months. If you have 2 academic years, it could be 16 months and you're still eligible for a 3-year program, okay? So if you have a 2-year program, you get a 3-year work permit. If you have a 1-year program, you only get a 1-year work permit. But you can do a 1-year program and then do another 1-year program. And these 2 programs together, 1 + 1 = 3, okay? 3-year work permit. So that's one thing to consider. You should have a plan as to how you're going to get PR even before you apply for the postgrad work permit, okay? Now, you know, there were some transitional provisions for COVID as well. You have to keep in mind about the distance education, okay? It's normally supposed to be less than 50% of your program. So think about that when you are doing your programs. Right now, if you're able to do in class, at least for the majority of your program, do it, okay? The other thing about the postgrad work permit is in order to qualify, you have to be a full-time student in every semester of your program except the last semester. So if you are not a full-time student, then that could create a big issue for later on when you want to apply for the postgrad work permit, because the officer will take a look at your transcripts. And if you did not take, the courses required for a full-time student, then they very well may reject your postgrad work permit. Now, it could be that you fail a course. As long as you take the whole course, you write the exam, etc., and you fail, that's still okay? But you have to be actively studying as a full-time student in order for every semester, except the last semester, in order to qualify for the postgrad work permit. Sometimes I have students come to me and they say, you know what, it's just this semester is just really bad for me. I don't think I can be full-time. Should I go part-time? My advice often to them is, you know what, if you want to get your postgrad work permit, the best way to do it would be to ask the school to give you authorized leave. So if they give you authorized leave, you take that semester off, do what you need to do to, get yourself, in a place where then you can go back and be a full-time student. If you take an authorized leave and you get leave from the school, that semester off is not considered detrimental to your postgrad work permit. Okay. Now, let's talk about when you can apply for your postgrad work permit. The IRCC website says that you can apply 180 days after you finish your studies. But that's not my recommendation, because if you just go and apply for your work permit, let's say 179 days after you finish studying, you very well would have lost your status at that point, and your study permit would have been rejected, because you lose your status 90 days after you finish studying. Remember, that was one of the first slides we were talking about, how you need to be actively studying. Well, if you stop being actively studying and you're not going into another program, then you lose your status 90 days afterwards. And in order to qualify for a postgrad work permit, you have to have a valid study permit. So my recommendation to you guys, and keep this deadline in mind, is that you should apply within 90 days of the completion of your program. The first notice that you receive, not when you convocate, the first notice that you receive, let's say you get your grades, you get a notice on your portal. That first notice that you've completed your program is when the clock starts ticking. And you should apply within 90 days and when your study permit is still valid. So if your study permit expires before the 90 days, then the expiry date of your study permit, that's your deadline. If your study permit is going to expire very shortly or even before you can get your grades, my recommendation is to apply for the study permit extension right away. Okay, so if when you apply, your study permit is still valid and you apply within 90 days of the completion of your program, then you can work full-time. If that is not the case, if you don't have a study permit, even if you're on applied status, you can't work full-time. Okay, and make sure you're applying within those timelines. All right, let's move on to permanent residence. The first system that I want to talk to you guys about is something that most of you probably have already heard about. It's the most famous one, or maybe the most infamous one. That's called express entry. And here's how it works. First, to get into the system, you have to create an online profile. And you can qualify based on one of three categories: Federal Skilled Worker class, Canadian Experience class, or the Federal Skilled Trades class. If you qualify, you can enter the express entry pool. Now, when you enter the express entry pool, it's very important that you understand that you have not at this point applied for permanent residence. Okay, you are just entered into the pool as a candidate. You are saying, I'm qualified and I'm willing to apply. When you enter the pool, you'll be given a series of points based on your background and if you have provincial nomination that's related to express entry. Not all provincial nomination, just the express entry provincial nominations. Okay. Every couple of weeks, although sometimes the government may not do this every couple of weeks, but normally they're supposed to every 2 weeks have a draw where they look at who's in the pool and they invite certain people in the pool. You can only apply for permanent residence under the system if you receive an invitation to apply. Okay, the invitations to apply, normally it's supposed to be based on your points, but often there are other criteria. So for example, in 2020 and 2021, the government was only interested for the most part to invite people who had Canadian Experience Class or provincial nomination, right? Moving forward, the government has announced that they might look at other criteria, for example, occupations, etc. Okay, so that's in a nutshell how the express entry works. Now let's look at it more in detail. The first category, let's talk about how you can enter the pool and qualify. The first category is called the federal skilled worker class, and many of you may already qualify to enter the pool based on this. Okay, in order to qualify, the work experience you need for this class is very different than the second one that I'm going to talk about, which is called the Canadian Experience Class. The work experience for this is you need to have 1 year of high-skilled work experience that is full-time, so at least 1,560 hours, which is equivalent to 30 hours per week for a year. You can add part-time if you do 2 years with 15 hours, you can add that together. It has to be at least 1 year though, okay, of high-skilled work experience in one occupation. And the work experience has to be continuous for that 1 year. Now, notice what I didn't say for this work experience. I didn't say that this work experience needed to be in Canada. I didn't say that this work experience needed to be when you're not a full-time student. I didn't say that this work experience needed to be self-employed, because all of that work experience counts for this category. Okay, it's very different, like I said, to the Canadian Experience Class category. We also look at other scores as well, and you need to have a minimum of savings. And so this is something that we can use to put you, if you qualify in the pool. We've used this to qualify many people from outside of Canada who have never been to Canada before as well. Okay, so this is called the Federal Skilled Worker Class. The second program is called the Canadian Experience Class. Now, the work experience for the Canadian Experience Class is very different. The work experience for Canadian Experience Class is you need to have 1 year in the last 3 years of high-skilled work experience in Canada that is obtained when you are not a full-time student and it was legally obtained, and you need to have been employed. Okay, so you can't use self-employment. You can't create your own business and employ yourself. Okay, it has to be when you are employed by an employer in Canada and you are working at least 1,560 hours. You can be doing different occupations. There could be breaks in between, okay? But it has to be in Canada. Now, this work experience from the Canadian experience class, it also gives you that same work experience will give you points to get out of the pool. Okay, so again, this work experience, 1 year of high skilled work experience, at least 1,560 hours. So high skilled, we talked about high skilled, has to be employed. It cannot be obtained when you are a full-time student. The third one is for trades. I'm not going to talk too much about this because most people don't qualify. You have to have an LMIA or provincial certification in one of the construction trades. Okay. All right. Now, let's talk about how you can actually get points for the express entry system. The first factor is age. You know, once you reach the 30s, every birthday you have after that is not a fantastic happy birthday, okay? Because every year after that, your points would drop by 5 or 6 points. In the 40s, your points drop by 10, 11 points until you get to your 45th birthday. Good news about that is you don't go down anymore. But the bad news about that is your age points is 0. Compared to someone in their 20s who would have points of 100, 110, that's a big disadvantage with regard to age, unfortunately. Okay, not a lot you can do about that, but you need to apply, you need to plan to apply as early as you can, if this is indeed what you're going to do. Okay, education, if you already have a program of 3 years, it doesn't have to be in Canada, it could be outside of Canada, like a bachelor's degree or even a college degree of 3 years or more, and you have your Mohawk program on top, that really makes you jump. Okay. Language, if you don't have any work experience, at this point, you have to have a very high, so if you don't have any Canadian work experience, at this point, you have to have a very high level of language points. Higher than, usually you're looking at 7s in reading, writing, and speaking, 8 in listening, or 9s for IELTS, or 9s in CELPIP. If you have work experience, that's tempered a little bit, okay? In terms of your Canadian work experience, like I said, that kind of work experience that gives you points is the same as a Canadian experience class work experience, except we can count work experience in the last 10 years compared to the 3 years for the Canadian experience class. Foreign work experience, high-skilled work experience that you've gained outside of Canada, if it's at least 1 year, then you can get points for that. Your spouse, if their education, their language skills, or if they have Canadian work experience, that can add some points to your overall family application. Otherwise, it may take away a few points. Now, I just wanted to talk first about what I mean by spouse. When I talk about spouse, I'm talking about not just someone that you're married to, but also someone that you are in a common law relationship with. What does common law mean? It means that you have been living together with your partner in a conjugal relationship for at least 1 year. Okay, so the law is very clear that after this 1 year, you guys are in a common law relationship. It doesn't matter whether or not you think your relationship is so amazing or not, okay? If you have lived with someone for at least a year, you are in a common law relationship. And this is very important. When you apply for anything in immigration, they always ask you, what is your marital status? If you have been in a common law relationship, you're in a common law relationship, you have to declare it as such. Not declaring it and saying you're single can carry with it a lot of repercussions. including misrepresentation, which carries with it a 5-year ban from Canada, including you not being able to sponsor your spouse later on. There's a whole host of issues, okay? So make sure you're very careful. Once you reach that 1 year of living together, mark it. You can go out to dinner, you don't have to go out to dinner, whatever it is, just mark it, okay? You are then a family under immigration law. Provincial nominee program, we're going to talk a little bit about that for the Ontario program. But if you are invited to apply, you receive a notification of interest, and you apply, you can get 600 points if you get your provincial nomination added to your points. And if you do so, then basically you're assured that you will be able to get invited to apply. Previous study in Canada, you guys will get 15 points for studying at Mohawk. Arranged employment. Now, a lot of people think, oh, okay, well, I have a job offer. I have a permanent job offer. I must have arranged employment. No, if you have an open work permit, like the post-grad work permit, that does not give you arranged employment. You have to, in order to get arranged employment, you have to have an LMIA or employer-specific work permits, such as free trade agreement or intercompany transferee category, okay? If you have brothers or sisters who are Canadians or permanent residents in Canada, you can get some points. Fluency in French can give you a lot of points. So if you are fluent in French, you may it may be worth it for you to do the French exam as well as the English exam. And trade certification, again, that's something that not many people at all have. That's to deal with the construction trades. You have to get the Red Seal certification or the provincial certification for that, okay? Now, looking at this, some of you may say, okay, you know what? I think I have a really good chance. Some of you may not be sure. Some of you think, oh my God, what am I going to do? Okay, don't worry. We have some other options for you. Just to let you guys know how the points are going, what happened is the government during COVID in 2020 and especially in 2021 had something where they just they invited a lot of people, probably too much people, through the express entry system in 2021. So that, and the points were quite low for those people who had Canadian experience class in 2021. At one point, they invited everybody in the pool. And then later on, it was even at the 300s. They also had another program called the TR2PR program, which also had a lot of people. So what the government realized in I think it was October of 2021, was that they had filled up all the inventory for 2022 in October of 2021. And so they stopped inviting people to apply for express entry unless you had provincial nomination. All the way, they stopped it for 9-10 months until July of 2022 of last year. Now, what happens is with express entry, they compare it to skimming the cream. Express entry, if they want to invite the people, they usually invite the top people with the top score. So if they want to invite 3,000 people at every invitation, they invite 3,000 people with the top CRS points. What happened when they stopped inviting people for 9 months is that cream got very, very thick. And as a result, the draws started, normally before COVID, it was the points were at the 470s. When they started in July of last year, it started, they at well over, I think it was 440 or something, 430, something very, very high in the 540, 530, a very, very high. And the points did drop a little bit, slowly dropping. The government also had some glitches in their system that they were trying to fix. So then they had stopped the draws for another month here, another month there. The last draw, I think, was 490. So they're dropping, but not as fast as I guess the government anticipated, or a lot of people anticipated. Right now, the 490s, a lot of students with work experience even may not have enough points to qualify. That's why the government, since 2021, has allowed students to apply to extend their postgrad work permits for 18 months. The government may come out with new programs. The points may drop, but it's also important in these kind of situations not to just depend on one thing. If your points are, not that high, especially for express entry, we also need to look at alternatives. So let's look at some alternatives. Now, before we go completely away from express entry, I do want to talk about the provincial nominee programs that are express entry linked. So provincial nominee programs are programs that every province has made an agreement with the federal government to allow each province to select their own people. Okay, so usually the federal government is responsible for immigration, and express entry is a federal program. But the federal government has said to the provinces, you can also select certain people for your own programs as well, okay? And so the Ontario's program is called OIMP, Ontario Immigrant Nominee Program. And what happens with express entry? So they have express entry linked programs I'm going to talk about, and they have non-express entry linked programs that Zia is going to talk about, okay? Let's first talk about the express entry linked programs. So with these programs only, if you get the provincial nomination, you get 600 points added to your profile, which basically assures that you will be able to get that invitation to apply. And how they work is you can't apply directly to the program. You can't apply directly to OIMP, okay? You have to first be in the pool, and then they will look through it and see whether or not they like you and they want to issue you a notification of interest, okay? You guys know the dating app Bumble? I think, I've never been on it, but I think it's how it works is the men can't contact the women directly. They can just be in the pool, and then the women look at whose profiles there are, and they decide to swipe right or swipe left, right? Swipe right is good, I think, right? So if they decide to swipe right on the guy, then they can start talking, okay? So this is just like Bumble. OIMP is like the women, and you guys are like the men, okay? You can't just go and contact the OIMP directly and say, oh, I'm very interested in applying. No. First, you go into the express entry pool. And then OIMP, the officers will go through who's in the pool, and then they will decide whether or not they want to swipe right on you and give you a chance to apply with them, and then get the 600 points, okay? Now, who do they want to swipe right? There are three categories. The first category is called the human capital stream. You have to have a bachelor's degree in order to qualify for this. It doesn't have to be in Canada. It could be from outside of Canada, but you have to have a bachelor's degree. And right now, what they have done is they look a lot at occupations. So they have already stated, for example, that they like people in certain tech occupations. Those are the tech draws. And then before they also have other things like other occupations as well, okay? So that's something that, they decide who they want to invite, but you have to have a bachelor's degree. The second one is for French speakers. Again, you have to have a bachelor's degree here. And if your language level is at the CLB level of 7 in French and 6 in English, you could be invited. But in the last few draws, they have also been looking at occupations in this. Okay. And then the third one is the skilled trades. So the skilled trades is something that I really like because it's one of those ones that allows people who have lower scores, significantly lower scores sometimes, to also get 600 points. You don't have to have a bachelor's degree. All you have to have done is worked legally in Ontario with a valid work permit in one of the construction trades that they had mentioned for at least 1 year in the last 2 years. If so, and you're in the pool, they could very well invite you to apply. Like I've seen them invite people in the 300s often to apply. So that's something that is quite good for those who are in the trades. Okay. All right, over to you, Zia.
Okay, so Elizabeth's gone through a lot of the express entries and the provincial nomination that's based with express entries. You may be sitting there thinking, well, none of this really works for me, right? You may be thinking that these programs sound great, but maybe you don't qualify, or maybe your points are just not high enough. Well, there are other options through Ontario that are not linked to express entry. Okay, so these are the non-express entry streams. Now, the way that Ontario processes their non-express entry streams is that there is an expression of interest system. So what this means is that in order to start the process for these particular programs, the first step is to create a profile in Ontario's pool for the particular stream that you're interested in applying through. So Ontario has a total of 5 non-express entry streams, and so each of these have different pool of candidates. So the first step is identifying which one you're interested in, creating a profile, and going into those pool of candidates. Now, when you're in the particular pool, what Ontario does is allocate a score. Your score is based on the criteria that Ontario uses for your particular program. So each program, each stream that Ontario has, the criteria they use is a little different. So the total number of points will vary depending on your category. Now, when we look at Ontario's system, there's quite a few differences in terms of how they score applicants compared to what Elizabeth was talking about in the express entry system. One of the biggest ones is that age does not count. So there is no point allocation for age in Ontario. So regardless of how old you are, it will not matter when you're going through the non-express entry streams for Ontario. Additionally, when we look at the work experience criteria or allocation for points, experience that you're obtaining while you're studying here in Canada may also count for points. So that might give you a bit of a advantage when you're going through the non-express entry streams. Now, with these streams, and we'll talk about the different programs or the different streams in a moment and the criteria, some of them Ontario is also doing draws based on occupations as well. So very similar to what Elizabeth was talking about for the human capital priority stream, Ontario has been implementing that this year for their non-express entry streams as well. So looking at what occupation your job offer is in and doing draws based on that as well. In terms of these draws, Ontario doesn't announce in advance as to when they're going to do their draws, unfortunately. So they do announce afterwards that a draw has been completed, and they'll publish the criteria for those draws, but nothing is announced in advance. So we don't know in advance of when a draw is going to happen or what criteria Ontario is going to use to select people for that particular draw. What that means is that certainly if you do qualify, if you are eligible, it is important to be in the pool as soon as possible so that you are a part of as many draws while you're eligible. So let's take a look at a couple of the streams. In Ontario, in terms of these non-express entry streams, there are 3 that are employer-based. So what this means is that when we're talking about the employer-based streams, there's criteria on you as the applicant, on the position that you're being offered, and on the employer that's supporting your application. Okay, so different things that you do have to keep in mind when you're evaluating eligibility for these 3 employer-based streams. Now, in terms of the employer criteria, it's the same across all 3 streams, so I want to look at that first. The employer does have to have been in business for at least 3 years. If the employer is inside of the Greater Toronto Area, then they have to be able to demonstrate a gross income of at least $1 million in their past fiscal year, and they need to currently employ 5 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. Now, those numbers decrease for an employer that's located outside of the Greater Toronto Area. So for a company outside of the GTA, that decreases to a gross income of $500,000 in the past fiscal year and needing only 3 full-time employees that are Canadian citizens or permanent residents. In terms of the job offer, it does have to be full-time and it does have to be permanent. When we're talking about a permanent job offer, what that means is that there is no end date. So the contract that you hold is of an indeterminate length. There's no real end date that's listed on that contract.
And Zia, I just wanted to say, one of my favorite things about Hamilton is that it's very close to Toronto, but it is outside of the GTA. So you guys have that advantage for if you're going to work in, it's considered outside of GTA.
Yeah, definitely. Let's take a look at the 3 streams that fall under the employer base. So the first is the international student stream. Here, you do have to have a high-skilled job offer, and the salary being offered to you does need to meet the entry-level wage for the occupation you're being offered a job in. Additionally, you do have to apply within 2 years of your graduation, and you have to have graduated from either a 2-year program or a 1-year postgraduate program. Now, when we're looking at that 1-year postgraduate program, Ontario is looking to say, what is the eligibility requirements for the school for that particular program? And so the eligibility criteria today is that you need to have, that the school needs to require at least a degree in order for it to be eligible. If the program says that you can start this postgraduate program with a diploma or with work experience, for example, then that 1-year program will not make you eligible for the international student stream. Now, what we don't see here in terms of criteria is any work experience requirement. So as soon as you finish your program of study, the international student stream might be one that you're eligible for and that you can start applying through.
So also, guys, this definition of the postgraduate program, the government did say that they wanted to change that to adhere to what the Ontario education system says is a postgrad program. So we will be signing you guys up to our news bulletins. When we get any changes to the news, we usually send out a blast to you guys so that we can update you guys on changes to the law that could affect you.
Yeah, the second program that falls under the employer-based stream is the skilled worker stream. Here again, the job offer that you're using has to be high skilled, but it has to also meet the median wage. Now, very importantly here, you do have to have at least 2 years of experience in the past 5 years, and that experience has to be in the same occupation code as your job offer. So here's where we see one of Ontario's streams where you do need work experience. Now, with the skilled worker program, there's no education component to it. Okay, So there's no minimum education required for this particular program, but you do have to have 2 years of experience within the past 5 years. Your experience doesn't have to be in Ontario. It can be anywhere in the world. It just has to be within the past 5 years.
So if you guys have a spouse that, is able to work while you guys are studying, if they find something in this situation, they may qualify under the skilled worker because they don't qualify under the international student stream. Sometimes people don't apply fast enough, even if they have studied in Canada, to qualify under the international student stream within that 2 years. So then we need to go to the skilled worker, but they need to have the 2 years of work experience in that occupation.
Perfect. And the last stream that falls under the employer-based categories is the in-demand stream. Now, for this one, so Ontario has a list of occupations that fall under their in-demand program. When we look at this list, this is the only place we see low-skilled occupations as being part of the program. So here is where, if you have a job offer in a low-skilled position, if it is part of the list of occupations, this would be the program that we can look at applying through. So your job offer does have to be from an occupation on the list. It does have to meet median wage. And additionally, you have to have at least 9 months of experience in that occupation that's in Ontario, and that work experience does have to be legal work experience. However, that work experience doesn't have to be with the same employer that you're using to apply through this employer-based stream. So the job offer that you hold, that you're applying for nomination through the OINP program, doesn't have to be the same employer that you've obtained the 9 months of work experience in. And like Elizabeth was saying, again, if you have a spouse who's working, this may be another route for them to qualify and apply for permanent residence, potentially while you're still doing your program of study.
And these jobs on this list, this is one of the categories where you can use low-skilled work experience. In fact, all of the jobs on this list are low-skilled. So things like if you're working for an agency that sends you to work at people's homes as a personal support worker, lots of factory workers, construction laborers, those are some of the things that you can use for this job as well, this category. Okay. Finally, we wanted to talk to you guys about the caregiver program. Now, the caregiver program, there's a lot of issues with it. It's taken a lot of time for them to process applications that were submitted under the caregiver program. However, in your situation, it may be a good application to do because it could be you yourself who are doing the caregiver program, or even your spouse if they have a work permit while you're studying to do this. Because to qualify for it is relatively easy. You have to take care of someone in their home, and you have to be hired by them or their families to take care of them in their home. Okay, you're caring for children or the elderly or disabled person. Just have to have 12 months of full-time work experience. You need to have 1 year of post-secondary education anywhere in the world. And you have to have the English level where you meet the CLB benchmark of 5. So 5 in IELTS, reading can be 4.0 in IELTS, the rest is 5, okay? So that may be something to consider as another program to do. Okay, guys, so we've talked a lot about different programs, and it's a lot of information for you. What we want to do now is just offer you a few practical pieces of advice as to what you need to do now.
So the first is it's really important to have an immigration plan. So knowing what your immigration goals are and having a plan as to how to get there. You know, coming to webinars like the one you're at today is a great first step, but it is a very high level overview, right? There's many programs that are available to you, and it may not be the ones that we've talked about today. There may be other ones that are better suited for you. So, we do recommend that you sit down with a professional, an immigration lawyer who's able to go through your background and really identify what the best options are for you.
And once you have your plan, you have to carry out. Execution is sometimes quite difficult. Sometimes you really have to study and practice that IELTS, for example, or maybe you might not be able to have a good chance if you only did a one-year program, you only get a one-year work permit, right? So know what your plan is, and if you're really determined that you want to stay here, be prepared to have to work hard for it.
And we started talking about this right from the beginning today. It's really important that while you're here in Canada, that you stay in status, right? So keeping that temporary status. And really importantly, do not misrepresent yourself. This can carry very, very heavy consequences, like Elizabeth was talking about earlier, regardless of whether it's innocent, something as simple as the definition of spouse that Elizabeth was going through. Really important to understand exactly what it is that you're doing and not misrepresent yourself with IRCC.
And finally, hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but if your application is rejected, I mean, the best thing is you're working with a lawyer from the beginning, so you minimize this chance. But if your application is rejected, make sure you do not delay to contact a lawyer, not a consultant, a lawyer right away, okay? There are certain time limits with regard to, for example, you challenging the decision in federal courts. If you apply in Canada, then the timeline is only 15 days from the date that you receive the decision to go to federal court. Outside of Canada is 60 days. Also, sometimes people think, oh, you know what? The call center agents, they're really nice. If I call them, they'll help me out, right? The call center agents may be nice, but oftentimes the help that they provide is not really helpful. For example, sometimes if you call them and you say, you know what, this is not fair, First of all, it goes into your record, whatever you say, and they can say, well, okay, why don't you just write a note and tell them what it is that you don't think is fair, okay? Now, you may not understand why and what what the reasoning was. You may not understand if it was unfair, why under the law it was wrong for their reasoning. But if you just write a note to them, that will be your one chance to ask for reconsideration. If you write a note to them and then they come back to you and say no, you can't then go to a lawyer like me, for example, say, hey, Elizabeth, can you now help me out? Because if I go back to immigration and say, try to explain it, they'll say, sorry, sir, we're not even going to look at what you're saying, because that person already had their chance for reconsideration. Okay. And finally, the timelines really matter. You may be out of time to file a restoration of status or to apply for a postgrad work permit very shortly after you get a rejection. Okay, so make sure that you do not delay to seek help. All right, so here's our information. If you would like to schedule a time with us to have a consultation, we do all our consultations on Zoom. Let us know, and let us know that you've come to the webinar so that we can give you our student discount. Okay. Do we have time? We have some time for some questions. Holy cow, we have 47 questions. All right. Zia, shall we get started?
Yeah, definitely. So
okay.
There's quite a few on these, Liz, so I'm going to just kind of summarize them together. Talking about the work experience ability on a study permit. Okay. For full-time students, how many hours can they work? And is there a difference between how many hours they can work on versus off campus?
So if you're a full-time student, now if you're a part-time student, don't even ask. You cannot work at all if you're a part-time student, okay? Just on your study permit. If you had a work permit, otherwise you could, but just on your study permit, you can't. But if you're a full-time student, you can work full-time on campus and whatever the rules are for off campus as well, okay? You can do both. Now, normally it's 20 hours off campus while you are studying, unless you're on scheduled break, which you can work. You cannot work at all if you're on authorized leave. Okay, don't just think, oh, I don't have money, so I'm just gonna go on authorized leave and work. No, you cannot work at all on authorized leave. Okay. Now, if you hold a study permit and that study permit was applied for before October 7th of last year, and that study permit has not expired yet, you can work full-time. But if your study permit had expired sometime this year and you applied for a new one, you cannot work full-time on that new study permit. You're only able to work 20 hours on that new study permit off campus. You can work full-time until your old study permit that you applied for before October 7th. You can work full-time on that, but you can't work based on the new, when that expires. Even if you have a new study permit, you can only work 20 hours a week.
And on campus, does that change?
On campus, you can work anytime, full-time, anytime, as long as you're a full-time student.
So the hours that you work on campus are not limited by your maximum number of hours that you can work off campus.
That's right.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, so we have a question here where if someone has two programs, do they need completion letters or can they apply only with the transcript?
Yeah, so with the postgrad work permit application, IRCC does have documents that they require. Part of that is the completion letters and the transcripts. Now, that does, if you're trying to combine two programs together, then yes, you would need to be applying with both of those. Liz, how do we know what is the NOC classification of a job?
Google and go onto the government website for the NOC codes. It's not about just what your occupation title is. It's about what you actually do. A lot of times it's more of an art than a science because not everybody will fit, and very few people fit exactly into one occupation. Sometimes your duties may span different occupations, but essentially what we're supposed to do is look at the one where the majority of your duties fall into a particular occupation. Okay. Do you need to, when you graduate, do you need to work in occupation that is related to your field of study?
No, for a majority of the programs, no, you don't. When we look at Canadian Experience class, for example, as long as it's a high-skilled position, it doesn't matter if it's related to the area, the industry that you studied in. Elizabeth, for the postgrad work permit, if we need to apply to extend a spouse's work permit at the same time, do we need a job? And what NOC does that job need to be in? Or what tier?
Yeah, so it used to be that you had to have a high-skill job in order for your spouse to extend their work permit when you get your postgrad work permit. But the government did change their rules just recently so that even if you have any job, even if you had a low-skill job, your spouse can still get a work permit, but you do have to have a job. Okay. What happens with that work permit of the spouse, though? Is it valid for 90 days after they stop studying?
No. So let's say if we go back to our example from earlier where you have a study permit that's valid till 2025, you stop studying in 2023, your spouse may have an open work permit that's valid till 2025. That open work permit is valid regardless of when you stop studying, because it's already been issued. So that doesn't get affected by your studying. Okay, just going to scroll down here. What is the processing time right now for extending study permits?
Good question. There's a site on IRCC where you can go on the IRCC website where you can look at processing times. Those are in general. Oftentimes I can see that some are processed much faster and some are processed much slower. You know, they are trying to implement a artificial intelligence system to help process study permit extensions in Canada to try to make it go faster. Whatever it is, I would say if you know that you're going to continue to study in Canada, don't wait on applying for that extension if you need that extension, because you can't really rely sometimes on, even if they said it's, you know, I don't exactly know what the website says right now, but even if they said it's, you know, 8 weeks or so, it could very well be longer than 8 weeks. So if you can, apply early, and then, you know, that'll reduce that worry for you. Okay, so someone had applied for a study permit to study in Canada in one particular program, but they wanted to change their program. Is that bad? What do they have to do in those situations?
So it depends on what stage you're at. If your study permit application is still in process and you're changing programs or schools, you can always update your study permit application with the new letter of acceptance, the new program letter. So basically notifying IRCC. If your study permit has been approved, but you haven't yet traveled to Canada and you're changing programs within the same school, that's fine. There's no issue there. If you're changing institutions altogether, so you're not going to be studying at the school that you submitted your initial study permit application for, then you would need to let IRCC know. And you actually, in those situations, need a new study permit. So you would have to apply for a whole new study permit before you travel to Canada. Now, it's a little different for those that are already in Canada and are applying for extensions or hold study permits and are looking to change courses or change programs. If you're already in Canada, you've started studying and you want to change your program or change your school, you do need to let IRCC know. So you can do that online through the MyCAC portal, but you don't necessarily need to get a new study permit for that program, that new school.
And the question also says, can they work more than 20 hours if they had to change the program? But I'm assuming this study permit was applied for before October 7th of last year.
So if you're still on the same study permit, then that wouldn't be your ability to work wouldn't be affected.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So here's a question that comes up, Elizabeth. For someone who is finishing their program of study, and their study permit is going to be expiring within that 90-day period, or let's say even the day after they finish their program, what's your advice to them in terms of, do they apply for an extension? When should they apply for the extension? Can they still qualify for the postgrad work permit?
Mm-hmm. So I think if your end date is really close, like let's say end of April, you know, it's really close to when you're finishing the program, you may not have enough time to get a transcript and, you know, to apply for your postgrad work permit, right? So in those kind of cases, the best thing to do is to apply for that extension of your study permit as soon as possible. So that usually the officers are supposed to issue a study permit 90 days after your program ends to allow you to have time to apply for your postgrad work permit. If your application is, your study permit expires maybe a month or 2 months after your study program is over, I think that's reasonable just to apply. You don't need to file an extension, just apply before your study permit expires. Okay. Yeah, sorry, Hussam, this is a question that someone had for the college. The question is, does the college avoid sending notification and completion until they are able to provide all of the documents to submit a postgrad work permit?
So depending on the professor that you have, you could potentially ask the professor for any specific official document that says you've completed your program, so you could essentially apply for postgraduate work permit. And Elizabeth, correct me if I'm wrong, but any official sort of messaging from the college will enable you to apply for the postgraduate work permit?
I mean, when you apply for the work permit, you do want to have the documents. So the completion letter from the school and the transcripts, those are the normal documents that you have to submit. But the timeline starts ticking. The clock starts ticking as soon as they've received any notification from the school that they have completed their program, and they have to stop working at that point until they can actually apply for the postgrad work permit. So sometimes if the school notifies them but doesn't give them the actual documents, and there's a lag in between, then they would have to stop working for a period of time until they get new documents.
Yeah. So my best suggestion for that is to connect with the international department once you're in that situation. I think they should be able to help you with the process. And there are international advisors there that, will be able to support you in that situation. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, I think we've answered other questions. Zia?
There are a lot of, sorry, Elizabeth, there are a lot of questions that we're seeing here about what's the best route for me, right? So given my particular background, whether it's I'm doing a 1-year program, 2-year program, I have work experience, I don't have work experience, how do I figure out what the best route is for me to apply for permanent residence?
Yeah, and that is really something that we can't answer over here. A, it's privacy. B, we don't know what your situation is. It's like you going to a restaurant and you say, okay, what's for dinner? Right? People say, well, I don't know. What is your circumstance? What do you want to eat? Right? Same thing. Don't go to, sometimes people email me and say, okay, tell me, how much is it to get permanent residence? I said, I don't know. I don't know your circumstances. We need to speak with someone for at least half an hour, if not more, to understand what your situation is and to give you a proper advice based on a plan for you. Now, once you have that plan, there might be several options for you. You want to see how that fits within your life. And that plan could change. Rules can change all of the time, right? But you have to start off with having a proper sit-down consultation about your own particular circumstances. Zia, after they renew their passport, do they have to apply for a visa again for the new passport?
Yeah, so it depends. If your visa is still valid in your previous passport, so it hadn't expired yet, you can travel with the previous passport, with the previous visa, along with your new passport. So holding both of those together and using the visa and the previous passport. However, if the visa from the previous passport is expired, then yes, you would need to get a new visa in your new passport in order to be able to travel and re-enter Canada. Elizabeth, what's the implication if I continue working before applying for the postgrad work permit?
That's a good question, and it's quite serious. So on your application forms, when you are applying for a work permit, they will ask you, have you worked without authorization, right? And, to not misrepresent yourself, if you have worked without authorization, you have to declare yes. Now, when you do, the officer, according to the regulations, is not able to issue a work permit for anyone who has worked without authorization within 6 months of when the officer gets to the application. So that could mean very well that your work permit gets rejected. So one of the reasons why, we're here talking to you guys is to try to prevent you from getting yourself into that situation. Now that don't work, when you finish your program, don't work until you apply for your postgrad work permit. Don't do it. It's just not worth it. Okay, so someone wants to know if they work during summer break, does that count for Canadian experience class?
It doesn't count because you're still considered to be a full-time student. So for Canadian experience class, you would not get points for that work experience. Elizabeth, the question we have is about self-employed work experience. Does that count for Canadian experience? Can you use it for something else?
Self-employment work is very problematic, and I do have a lot of issues with the government not really recognizing and helping people who start their own businesses in this sense, because they really limit how many points you can get with self-employed work experience. So if you are self-employed and you work for yourself, or you manage and control and a significant part of the company, then that's considered self-employment, and that does not count towards not only Canadian experience class. You can still get in under federal skilled worker, but the points for Canadian work experience is not counted. Can a person with a dependent work permit for 1 year be eligible for Canadian experience class?
Yeah, so someone who's here on an open spousal work permit, they can get the work experience and apply for permanent residence through any of the programs, including Canadian experience class.
Mhm.
Elizabeth, do I need IELTS or CELPIP for language if I've spoken English all my life, all my education's in English?
Yeah, yes, you do. Even if your entire ancestry is from England and you got your PhD in English literature and everything that you only language is English, you have to do the IELTS. And even if you're in that situation, go and do a practice exam, because these exams are no joke. They're very, very long. They can take hours to do. And they often test your ability to do the exam. Not, you can say, well, obviously I know English, but they often look at your ability to do the exam. And I've had many people whose only language is English not do well on the language exams because they are not prepared. So make sure you prepare. Is it
So I know we're nearing the end here. So I think we can find one more question.
One more question. Okay, let's make it good. You do have something for me, Zia?
I do. So a question here is, can I mix and match job experiences from different NOCs together to get my 1 year?
For the Canadian experience class, yes, you can. And also for the points for express entry, yes, you can. Okay. What else? Let's see. One last question.
I have one more for you.
Okay, good. You do it.
What's the difference between the study permit and the visa?
Okay, very good. Study permit gives you the ability to study in Canada. Okay, a visa is only required for some people who are from visa requiring countries to travel back to Canada if they have traveled outside of Canada and the US. The visa does not give you status. Okay, and if you're applying for a study permit extension in Canada, you're only going to get the study permit, not the visa. Once you have your study permit, or once you have your postgrad work permit, or then you can apply for a visa to allow you to travel. If you have a study permit or work permit, and it has not expired, and you just want to go, for example, to the States, and let's say you want to go to Buffalo to go shopping. Well, the law allows you, if you're only going to the States and nowhere else, to go there and come back and just on your study permit, work permit, even if you're from a visa requiring country. But if you're going anywhere else, like let's say you go back home, and let's say I'm Chinese, I'm going back home to visit my family. If I don't have that visa in my passport, I will not be able to come back to Canada. So that's the difference. All right, guys. Well, I think that's it for us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. As always, it's very informative, and I imagine all our students have learned something new today. One question for you. Will this recording be emailed to the students who've registered?
Yes, absolutely. We will email you guys the link. Normally what we do is it takes me some time to edit. Once it's edited, I put it on our YouTube channel, and also it's uploaded to our website. The website is lmlawgroup.com/videos. And we'll also email you the link to that. And then I will also email you the slides as well.
Great, excellent. Well, I highly suggest for any student that is, facing any challenges, making decisions when it comes to, immigration here, to seek out Elizabeth and Zia for one-on-one help, obviously. But again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And thank you everyone for joining us, and we'll see you soon.
Take care, everyone.
Okay,
Thanks,
take
Sam.
care.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye.